And we've had such a great morning already, which has been really fantastic. A few things before I jump into the message for us today. Some of you are fully aware that October is Pastor Appreciation Month, and it's awkward for me to even say that out loud because it's not something that I think too much about or concern myself with, but some of you pulled off a stunt from behind my back, and I didn't know was happening. And some of you rallied together and actually gave us a really great gift. And for myself and Desiree, for David and Hannah, our connections pastor, and Lisa, our children's director, or family ministry director. And on behalf of all of us, we'd like to say thank you for your generosity and your kindness. Thank you for my new Lamborghini. It's really great. Appreciate it. It's just parked out back. I'm kidding. Also, thank you to those of you who did submit your videos for Desiree and I as well. We received this 33-minute video of people just saying thanks to us. And it was interesting because for Desiree and I, we actually watched it at home and sat in tears a number of times. And in 28 years of pastoring, I've never had anything like this. So it was really great and special. So thank you very much for that. Really fantastic. Okay, so a couple things, just one particular thing before we jump into the content of our message as well, as far as opportunities go. One of the things that's been happening around the life of Vitalpoint, which some of you may not be fully aware of, but we have this movement happening on Tuesday nights with VPC students. And this past Tuesday night, we had 38 students get together and in Poplar Hill and in Exeter, and the combination of those two things, and some amazing things that are happening. And we're so excited to see this take shape. And what you need to know is, like pre-COVID, we were running a student ministry with a couple of kids, and then during the course of COVID, some things happened, and kids started getting older, then families started coming in with teenagers, and teenagers started spreading like a virus. It was unbelievable. And that was supposed to be funnier than what it was. It didn't land well, did it? Maybe it's my delivery wasn't very good. But you know what? It's so great. But here's the thing. I was talking to Lisa, our children's ministry and family director. She said, hey, Ron, you need to know that if we don't have some people step up, our team is going to be crushed by all these students. And so what we're saying to you is this, basically, is if you even hate kids, we'll take you. We would like to grow the leadership team in our student ministries, and if that's an interest to you, on Tuesday nights, it's a fairly big commitment, but you get to invest in students' lives and make a difference. So go to vitalpointchurch.com, fill out the Contact Us card, and that would be fantastic. It would be really great, all right? So that's an opportunity for you. I want to jump into our message today, and I'm going to give you the title of the message, and I want to open by reading the section that I'm going to look at for us. So the title of the message today is Almost Missed Jesus. And I want to read for you the section from Mark, and then I'll make some opening comments and then get into the content for us. So let me read it for you. Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 52. It says, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up into the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. One of the things that I want you to know about Vitalpoint Church, and especially if you're newer in person or online, is that we love to create a space for you to journey at the pace in which you feel comfortable in understanding what the Christian faith is about and the message of Jesus. So whether you're a person who has a lot of understanding or very little understanding, we're trying to move to a deeper knowledge of who Jesus is and our commitment to him. So the series we're in is called Christianity Exposed. And what we've been doing is we've been taking a look at this Gospel of Mark in the New Testament, and we've been unpacking stories from the life of Jesus to draw us closer to better understanding the heartbeat of Jesus and the message of the Christian faith. It doesn't matter if you're a person with lots of understanding or very little. Each and every one of us carry assumptions about the message of the Christian faith. We carry assumptions that are often misleading and false. We sometimes carry assumptions that shape our lives in a way that maybe pushes us away from truly understanding the message of Jesus. This past year has been a year where the message of the church and faith has been under a cloud of darkness, if you want to call it that. Earlier this year, or partway through this year, we look back at the news about the mass graves that were found around the residential schools. We watch this unfold and we begin to get a picture of what was happening, and many of us were horrified at what we saw and heard. We were moved deeply within ourselves. One of the things that happened for me in that season was I saw a picture that someone had drawn, and the picture was portraying the graves around the schools, and then in the background there was an image of a religious person wearing a robe and a collar. And I remember my heart sinking when I saw that picture, because when I saw that picture, I realized that that is not a representation of the true church and what Jesus came to do. Matter of fact, if you look at the New Testament, you look at the life of Jesus, you'll understand that he actually encouraged children to come to him. Culture was pushing children away. He was like, no, have them come to me. He would even use children as an illustration of what faith would look like. I would venture to say that Jesus actually started the movement that every child matters. As you think about that, let that just sink in for a minute, because he allowed them to come. He drew them to himself. What is happening, though, with some of our assumptions and some of our perspective on the Christian faith is that what is happening is this emerging thought and this idea that there's an incredible amount of suspicion around the church and around faith. Sometimes it happens within the church and sometimes without the church. There's this suspicion around it. Recently, recently, as in just a few days ago, I was reading some statistics from Barna Study Group in a Canadian context for church and faith. The interview, or the statistics, was revealing some questions that were asked of non-church-going people. And the study revealed that 49% of people who are non-church wanted to know that if the Christian faith was good, not necessarily true. Think about that for a moment. They didn't care if it was true. They just wanted to know if it was good. Does it add value? Does it bring about a consistency of making everything better in culture and society? I started thinking about that, and I realized what better time to step forward when there's suspicion and wondering about the Christian faith and about church, to step forward and say, it is true and it is also good. That there's a piece of that I'm so excited about as we step into this moment. This series, Christianity Exposed, has been doing its best, or we've been doing our best to create a new image, a picture for all of us. Whether you're a person who is convinced about who Jesus is, or whether you're not sure who he is, our hope and our prayers is that we're painting a clearer picture of who he is, and you can step into this moment and grasp and understand the depth of it. Now, what I want to do is I want to step into our section that we're looking at today, and I want to look at it and unpack it for us and draw us to some powerful insight on this story. This story in the life of Jesus is a moment captured in 3 out of the 4 Gospels. There's 4 Gospels in the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Matthew and Mark and John record this particular moment for us. What is good about that, if you're not aware of the Gospels, is that these particular writers give us a perspective on this moment. They fill in the picture for us. It's kind of like when a police officer goes to an accident scene and he begins to interview different witnesses to get the full picture of what happened. This is what we see in this moment, is that the Gospels are filling in for us a clearer picture, a fuller picture of Jesus. Now, Mark, who wrote this book, is actually interesting. He's influenced, obviously, by the Holy Spirit and the inspiration of writing these words, but the influence is this guy named Peter. And I love that because Peter walked with Jesus. He spent time with Jesus. And so Mark is giving his account through Peter as well. And conveniently, the story in this story, this moment, Peter leaves out the fact that he actually walked on water. This is the story connected to Jesus and walking on water, is that Peter actually got out of the boat in this story, connected to us in a different gospel, where he walked on water. And some have tried to guess why Peter actually had Mark leave it out. Some say maybe he was a little bit embarrassed because he walked a few steps and then he sunk in the water. And he did, or some say that Peter didn't want the distraction from Jesus to be on him because he failed, but we must all confess that at least he got out of the boat and tried walking on the water towards Jesus. What we have in this moment, though, is a dynamic of understanding what is going on in the disciples, Jesus, and for us today. Let me set it up for you in this way. When you look at this moment, you have to realize that there is a significant part of this section that leads to this. The disciples had been with Jesus in the daytime, and they had been part of this unbelievable miracle of feeding the 5,000. Actually, it was probably more than 5,000. There was a lot more people in the crowd than that. And Jesus takes a few loaves of bread and a few fish, and he feeds the 5,000. The disciples are the distributors of this particular miracle. They're amazed at what is happening, and they even have leftovers. And what takes shape in this moment, though, is that the disciples get into a boat at the end of the day. They get in the boat, and they go out on the water, and they hit a storm, and they start rowing in the wind and the waves. Now, Jesus in this moment is where? He's on the land. He's up on the mountain. And it says that it's evening time. The timing of this is critical. The timing is about 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So imagine the disciples are out on the water between 6 and 9 p.m., and Jesus is praying. What is he praying for? We don't know. I know you were hoping I'd answer that question for you, but I don't know. Maybe he was praying for the disciples because it's described for us that they missed the whole point of the miracle of the loaves. Maybe he was praying for them while they were struggling in the storm, whatever it might have been. Maybe he was just praying and restoring his heart and his energy with God the Father because he'd just done this unbelievable miracle of feeding so many people. We don't know. But here's something we do know about the situation. Is that Jesus saw them. Mark chapter 6, verse 48, the first part of it says, and he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. First thought about this. Sometimes when we face storms in life, we make the assumption that it is God's responsibility to remove the storm. Sometimes we carry this assumption that it is God's responsibility to remove the pain and even the struggle in our lives. There are times where we see stories like this, where Jesus will eventually calm the storm. He'll eventually help them get to shore. There are times when maybe we sing songs like we heard this morning, and we make some assumptions about God, and we carry them with us, believing that God's responsibility and number one job is to take the storms away, and the pain away, and the hurt. A few years ago, a friend of ours was exploring faith. We had been building a friendship with her and a relationship with her, and my wife and I, we had spent a lot of time investing in this person. And she started coming to church. She is part of who we are as a church. Like, bring friends with you and so on. So she would come to church, and she was making great progress. And then something happened in her life. Something started going sideways. Some things that were out of her control, some things that were as a result of her decisions. And as we walked with her in this moment, I will never forget it. She looked at me one day and she said, Ron, I'm doing all the right things. I'm going to church. I'm asking the right questions. Isn't God supposed to make my life better? Isn't God supposed to make my life better? And since that moment, she's walked away from exploring faith because she carried the assumption that he was supposed to take care of these things. See, so oftentimes we have an idea of God, that God is there as sort of my good luck charm, or like the genie in the bottle to give me my 3 wishes. This story is a reality check. It's a reality check to help us understand that life is hard, that there is going to be difficult times. There's going to be times when the wind is going to pound, the waves are going to hit us strong. There's going to be times where we're uncertain if we're actually going to make it. But what we must understand in this moment is Jesus is praying, but he sees them. He cares for them. It doesn't go unnoticed. So when you lose your job, or when you have a relationship go sideways, or when someone won't hire you, or your teenage son or daughter makes your life miserable. I was going to say something else, makes your life, you know what? And you feel like, you lost 5 years of your life because of the way they're behaving. God notices and sees it. There's another piece of this that I believe is important for us to consider as we think about this moment of Jesus seeing the disciples. There's a nuance in the moment where we must understand that at the end of the day, it says at the end of the day that Jesus put the disciples in the boat and then he went to pray. What you need to know about that in the sort of the original context, original language of that, it's actually that he compelled them. He constrained them to get in the boat, which means they really didn't have an option. That Jesus compelled them to get into the boat, and out of obedience, they got into the boat. Here's the thing that I wonder sometimes, that even in the midst of our obedience, sometimes the result is struggles, is storms, is difficulties. Sometimes we miss this piece. Even in our obedience to the things that God has asked us to do, there will be those moments where the waters are tough and difficult and the wind may blow. I've alluded to things in my own life as I teach and as I bring some of these things to light. And sometimes I want you to hear it from my own personal experience. Last year, I stepped into a moment of obedience. And I stepped into a time where I recognized that I needed to do something that God was asking me to do. And not that I had any sort of audible voices, but there was these confirmation moments of the steps of obedience. And I stepped into these moments and with great clarity made these decisions. And the result was so painful and so difficult that I found myself in the basement of my house in the darkness, undone. See, there's this reality check for us. Is that if we carry a false assumption about God, then we will lose sight of the storms and the struggles in our lives. We must see them differently. Because as you consider the progression of what the story is unfolding and what is happening here, there's something beautiful that takes shape. That Jesus sees them, he sees the storm, and he moves towards them. Look what it says. At about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by. He meant to pass by. What a beautiful moment. What you need to know about the 4th watch, and I didn't know this, and maybe some of you are way smarter than I am, probably knew this, but 4th watch is actually 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So, which means this. They've been rowing all night and getting nowhere. They've been rowing all night in their confusion, in their exhaustion. They just got off a full day. They got a full day working with Jesus and feeding a lot of people. And now they're in a boat that Jesus told them to get into. And they've been rowing all night getting nowhere. And Jesus walks towards them. Some interesting dynamics emerge for us. A hint to it is at the end of the section that I read to you in verse 52, where it says, "For they did not understand the loaves, but their hearts were hardened." See, there's an unpacking of this that we're beginning to see something very, very important. That even though these disciples, these were the guys that Jesus chose. He said, hey, come follow me. Give up everything, follow me. Walk away from your current lives and follow me. Go where I go, do what I do. In this moment, they are losing sight of who Jesus is. The loaves, they missed it, and their hearts were becoming hardened. But as Jesus walks towards them, something happens. Something begins to shift and take shape. See, Jesus walks towards them, and what does it say? Did you catch it? He intended to walk by. I love that little line. He intended to walk by. Now, what you need to know about this is that his intent to walk by wasn't to ignore them. See, we would make that assumption, right? That the idea of Jesus walking by is ignore. Like if you see someone you don't want to talk to, you just ignore them, right? Have you ever done this? No, don't put your hands up. Like you sometimes do this, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to talk to that person, so you kind of walk by like this, you know? You're like, I don't want to see them. And then later on you lie about it, right? Okay, maybe you don't. I hope I'm not just revealing who I am right there. Jesus wasn't walking by them to ignore them. I want you to hear this. His intent to walk by them was to assure them of his presence in the midst of the struggle and to reveal who he was. I want to say that again. His intent to walk by was to assure them of his presence in the midst of the struggle and to reveal to them who he was. How do we know this? We actually get this from verse 50, where it says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Take heart, do not be afraid. Jesus, in this moment, is beginning to give a hint and reveal again to them who he is. Because when he says to them, take heart, he's not saying, take heart, I'm here to save the day. Take heart, I'm going to calm the storm. Take heart, I'm going to get you to the other side. No, he says, take heart, not in yourself, but in who I am. He says, it is I. Oh, here we go. It's a hint to something that Jesus is revealing. And it's connected actually to something from the Old Testament. When you look at the phrase, it is I, it's connected to a reality of the promise of the presence of God for his people in the Old Testament. Let me take you there. In the Old Testament, there is a group of people called God's people, the Israelites, and God's people were in slavery in Egypt. And God shoulder taps Moses to go and deliver his people. So he says to Moses, you're gonna walk with me, you're gonna deliver my people out of Egypt. In the conversation that Moses has with God in Exodus chapter 3, he says, how will the people know it is you that has sent me? And God says to Moses, tell them I am has sent you. Okay, that's a revelation as to who God is, the authority of God, the presence of God as Yahweh Lord. So Moses goes and does this. He says, I am has sent me to you. Oh, that's the trigger point. That's an indication as to what is going on. Now, later in Exodus chapter 33, we have this moment where Moses and God are interacting with each other, and Moses is moving towards what is referred to as the Promised Land, and he's going to face some opposition. He's going to face some, in the context, some struggles and some difficulties. And the interaction that Moses has with God is so revealing. Listen to this. Exodus 33, verse 14. And he said, this is God speaking, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. So God is talking to Moses. And then Moses says, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? Okay? Some writers believe that this moment in Mark that we see where Jesus is revealing that I am and Moses parallel each other. Some believe that there's a significant connection. Why is that? Well, Moses in this moment is drawing on the presence of God where he had experienced the deliverance of God's people from Egypt. So there's this moment where God supernaturally intervenes and does these things that called the plagues that actually that moves God's people out of Egypt, which is so amazing. What did the disciples do? The disciples had this moment where there was a miracle that they experienced of the feeding of the 5,000. Moses in this moment in Exodus 33, what does he want? He desires the presence of God more than he desires the miracle of the promised land. Think about that for a moment. He desires more of the presence of God in the midst of the opposition in which he's facing than he does a miracle. Now, take the disciples. Flip it over to the New Testament. What is happening? These guys experienced a miracle, and it says that they missed it. They missed it. They completely missed the intent and the purpose of what Jesus had done with the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. See, when Jesus comes walking along, his intent for them is to stop rowing and see him and invite him into their boat, into the struggle in which they were facing. See, here's the piece of this that I think is important for us. Instead of assuming that God is the God who removes our pain, we must see God as a God of the promise of his presence in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our struggles. See, the disciples, they didn't need another miracle. They'd had a lot of miracles they'd seen him in part of up to this point. They had seen God, they'd seen Jesus do incredible things. what one author said is that these guys actually needed more of the promise and the assurance of the presence of Jesus in the midst of their storm. It's such a beautiful moment for us. It's a revealing of a truth about the Christian faith. See, sometimes what happens is we associate faith with a feeling, right? We associate a feeling of God's presence, and if we don't feel God's presence, then we assume he's not present. And what we must understand in the Christian faith is that the Christian faith is not based strictly on a feeling, although there is those moments, but it's more based on the promise of his presence. When faith is based on a feeling, you have a superficial, surface level perspective of God. Faith based on the promise of his presence creates a resilient disciple of Jesus, which creates a vibrancy in our faith. Because no matter what we face, we're not basing it on our feelings, we're basing it on the promise of his presence. Our human response, though, is to do what? Is to row. Is to keep rowing. These disciples did what they knew what they had to do. They had to continue to row in the waves and in the storm. Sometimes we just want God to remove these things from our lives, to reduce the wind, to take the storms away. But what if we actually positioned ourselves in a different way? What if we actually positioned ourselves in the midst of the storm to see it as a possible thing that God is using to reassure us of his presence and deepen our trust in him? See, pain and struggle and interruptions and storms of our lives reveal what we're actually putting our trust in. Think about this last year and a bit. I know we don't want to. I get it. I'm with you on this. I'm with you. I get this. But think about this last year. What has happened for many of us, it's been a revealer. It's actually shown us how we have put our trust in things that are actually not creating a firm foundation for our lives. See, pain and interruptions and uncertainty does that. It's the great revealer. It's the great revealer. And maybe what we need to see is that the storms we face are the channels that we navigate to anchor our faith in someone other than our feelings, that are anchored our faith in the person of Jesus Christ. See, sometimes it's more about, hey, why, God, is this happening to me? God, why aren't you taking this away from me? But maybe God's just saying, why don't you reposition it so that you can see me in the midst of it, or that you can claim the promise of me and the goodness of me in the midst of it. Psalm 23, a familiar passage for people who are churched and unchurched. Even though I walk through what? The shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. Listen, we can't judge the disciples. We can't get all judgy on them. Like, what were they doing? You know, how come they kept rowing? They should have just invited Jesus to come in. But the disciples are us. Or maybe I should better put the disciples of me. The disciples me. Like, I know that feeling. I know that in times, even when I face difficulties, I feel like I just got to row harder, right? Get more determined. Got to pull up the bootstraps. I just got to keep rowing, and keep rowing. And in my rowing, I actually miss the presence of God and the struggle of God. See, what Jesus is doing with his intent to walk by is seeing if the disciples are going to prioritize their relationship with him. It's a realization that Jesus is saying, will you prioritize your relationship with me in the midst of your storm? I want to step into a moment that I need to share something with you that I believe I need to say. And what I'm about to say, please don't throw anything, and wait 24 hours to email me if you've got an issue with it, okay? So some of you are like leaning in now. I was just checking to see if you're awake. I want to say this, and I believe I need to say this. I am convinced, at times, we place more trust in our self-help techniques and in our therapy sessions than we do trusting in the presence of Jesus in the midst of our storms. All right, I'm going to say it again. I'm convinced at times we place more trust in our self-help techniques and in our therapists than we do trusting in the presence of Jesus. Now, some of you are like, are you against therapists? No, not at all. I have one, just so we're all on the same page. And I don't know where I'd be at times if it wasn't for my personal therapist that I go to. Are there necessary techniques to life? Absolutely there is. I've got a leadership coach that walks me through leadership development and so on and so forth. I would even take it a bit farther, and actually my friend, one of my inner circle friends that I'm accountable to is actually a therapist, and he was in the first service, and we're still friends. He's a therapist, and he's still my friend. We double-checked between services today. And he said, it's interesting, Ron, it was so true what you said, because people even do that with pastors in churches. They put more trust in a church or more trust in a pastor than they do, and they're prioritizing their relationship with Jesus. And I'm like, touche. Well played. Because it's true. I still refer people to therapists. I just feel like I need to say that out loud. Make sure they're, a solid Bible-based person that can lead you to deeper commitment to Jesus and all that kind of stuff. But the warning is still there. We must be careful in the midst of our storms that we don't prioritize other things over our relationship with Jesus. Because when we prioritize our relationship with Jesus, we begin to have an experience of his goodness in the midst of our storms. I think that we're living in such an awesome time right now. You don't understand how excited I am about what is in front of us right now as individuals and as a church. That there's this realization that there's this moment that we're stepping into where we can actually begin to examine, what do I really trust in? My friend the other night was over for dinner, her and her husband, and the four of us, were sitting down, we're talking, and she said to me, I'm not the same person that I was 18, 20 months ago. And she began to unpack that the last 18 to 20 months has revealed to her what she had put her trust in, and her strength and her faith had grown and deepened because her relationship with Jesus has gotten stronger. See, when we turn the corner and we begin to realize that we can actually invite Jesus into our boat, in which we see in this moment, in this account of Mark chapter 6, is that when he got into the boat, it says that the winds and the waves stopped and there was great calm. And the disciples were astounded. Matter of fact, in the Gospel of Matthew, it says that they were so astounded that they started worshiping him and saying, truly, he is the Son of God. Truly, he is the Son of God. See, maybe the thought today is to remove the assumption that God's responsibility is to remove the storms and adjust it to the place where we see that actually he just wants to be present in the midst of the storm and to give us rest. Did you notice that in Exodus that I read for you? When God says to Moses, I'll go with you and I'll give you rest. That even though the struggle was going to be real, even though it's going to face opposition and people are going to whine and complain, the children of Israel did that often. They turn their backs on God. He says, my presence is with you. I will give you rest. So the question I have for you is, when you're in the storm, what are you running towards? Or what are you running from? See, the reality is, and I'm not saying anything you don't know. You know life is filled with storms. Life sometimes does suck. It really does. And it is difficult, and it is dark. There are times where we wonder if we can even put one foot in front of the other. There are times when we can't even find ourselves even able to get out of bed some mornings. But what if we turned the corner and we actually saw this beautiful truth that God sees you, he knows you, he cares for you, and he's moving towards you. But will you stop rowing? Will you stop rowing? Will you take this moment to run to him instead of from him? Because it's very possible that some of you right now are sensing this pull and this tug. That there's a sense that you have right now where you're realizing that God is drawing you into a relationship with him and you're resisting him. And I would say to you, stop rowing. Invite him into the boat. Allow him to journey with you. Josh is going to sing this song. The team's going to sing this song. It's called Run to the Father. It's a beautiful song. And as we experience this, I would love for you just to ask yourself, where am I running? What am I doing? And maybe, just maybe today, you'll be embraced by the everlasting arms of the one who loves you deeply, and his name is Jesus. Listen to this song.